They laughed at him. A shopkeeper's son? Competing with the richest men in the world? You won't believe this. Marcus Samuel didn't just compete. He built an empire that rewrote the rules of global trade in a time when oil was a dangerous gamble and only the giants dared to play. He turned a tiny family business into the biggest oil company on the planet. The truth revealed is that his journey started with seashells. Yes, seashells, and ended with tankers slicing through oceans, fueling entire nations. No one saw it coming, but along the way, he faced bankruptcies, ruthless rivals, and to world wars. It almost didn't work, and yet, each setback became the fuel for his next breakthrough. This isn't just a story about oil. It's a masterclass in vision, risk-taking, and the hidden lessons that could change the way you see business forever. Because what no one tells you is that the most powerful companies on Earth often start in the most unexpected places. And this one started in a dusty little shop in London. Topic 1. Humble beginnings in London. Marcus Samuel didn't grow up in a palace of marble halls or gilded wealth. He was just a boy in the bustling streets of mid-1800s London, where fog clung to cobblestones and the smell of coal smoke lingered in the air. His family owned a modest little shop, nothing fancy, tucked into a corner of the city. And yet, this wasn't just any store. It specialized in rare, decorative seashells. You won't believe this, but in Victorian England, those shells were like status symbols for the wealthy. They weren't buying them for the beach. They were buying them to show the world they had taste, refinement, and, of course, money. Imagine walking into that shop as a kid and seeing polished, exotic shells from far-off lands, their colors, catching the candlelight. For the Samuels, each shell told a story of oceans crossed, ships sailed, and fortunes made or lost. That's the hidden lesson here. Sometimes your future empire hides in the smallest details of your childhood. No one saw it coming, but these seashells would one day give Marcus not just a business, but a brand name recognized across the globe. You see, London in that era was a melting pot of ambition and survival. Street vendors shouted over each other to sell their goods while horse-drawn carriages rolled past. Marcus grew up watching how commerce worked, how trust was built between seller and buyer. His parents weren't just selling shells, they were selling the idea of elegance. And that's what really happened. Long before shell became oil, it was about prestige. If you're running your own small business today, take note, it's not just what you sell, it's the feeling people buy into. Marcus was no ordinary shopkeeper's son. He had this quiet habit of observing customers, their preferences, their body language, the way their eyes lingered on certain items. It almost didn't work for him to stay in the background, but he learned something priceless: patterns. He saw how trends were born, how one wealthy lady's purchase could spark a wave of copycats. Learn from this mistake. Too many entrepreneurs chase trends without understanding why they happen. Marcus understood it early, and it changed everything. Even as a young man, he sensed there was more beyond London's streets. The shells came from far away, places he'd never seen but dreamed about. This sparked a restlessness, a hunger, to go beyond the four walls of that little shop. That's the secret behind it. His ambition wasn't about escaping hardship, it was about expanding possibility. He started asking himself dangerous questions for a man of his modest means. What if I could bring back more than just shells? What if I could control the trade routes themselves? And so the seeds were planted, quietly, almost invisibly, in the mind of a shopkeeper's son. Marcus didn't know it yet, but those polished seashells were just the beginning of a far bigger story, one that would take him far from the dusty streets of London and straight into an opportunity no one saw coming. Topic 2. Spotting an unlikely opportunity. Marcus Samuel had a knack for spotting what others ignored. In the crowded markets of London, traders fought for the same customers, selling the same predictable goods, but Marcus, he kept his eyes on the ships docking at the Thames, loaded with treasures from the Far East. You won't believe this, but in the mid-1800s, Britain's hunger for exotic imports was exploding. Tea, spices, fine textiles, these weren't just luxuries, They were symbols of status. And Marcus knew that when people want a taste of something rare, they'll pay almost anything for it. One day, as crates from Asia were unloaded, he noticed something interesting. Alongside the tea and silk came sacks of rice, boxes of rare spices, and yes, even more decorative shells. That was the hidden lesson. The value wasn't just in one product, it was in controlling the variety and supply. No one saw it coming, but Marcus was about to turn his family's shop into a gateway to the East. Imagine the leap. From a dusty storefront to orchestrating trade routes across oceans, he began expanding the family's operations, building relationships with suppliers far beyond Britain. For Marcus, this wasn't just business, it was adventure. Each deal meant new cultures, new tastes, new markets to conquer. It almost didn't work at first. Some suppliers doubted a small London shopkeeper could handle big orders. But here's what really happened. Marcus offered them what larger traders couldn't: trust, reliability, and a willingness to adapt to their needs. That's what no one tells you about building partnerships. It's not the size of your business, it's the size of your commitment. This expansion came with risk. Shipping was expensive, routes were unpredictable, and storms at sea could wipe out an entire shipment. Learn from this mistake. If you want to scale a business, you can't just dream big. You have to build systems that survive the worst days. Marcus diversified his cargo, ensuring that if one shipment failed, others would cover the loss. That's how he kept moving forward when others quit. And with each successful voyage, his reputation grew. The Samuel shop was no longer just a place to buy shells, it was a place to buy the world. This changed everything. People started coming not for a single item, but for the experience of owning something rare and foreign. That feeling of exclusivity, it's still the secret behind luxury brands today, from fashion houses to high-end tech. Yet, in all this trading, there was something bigger brewing, a demand so massive it would overshadow everything else he'd ever imported. Marcus didn't know it yet, but the next opportunity wouldn't come in the form of shells or spices. It would come from a dark, viscous liquid, one that smelled of industry and could light up entire cities. Topic 3. The oil discovery that changed everything. It was during his travels in Asia that Marcus stumbled upon a market shift so massive, it made spices and shells look like pocket change. You won't believe this. In the late 1800s, the demand for kerosene and crude oil in Europe was skyrocketing. Cities were glowing with gas lamps, factories were roaring, and ships were hungry for fuel. But here's the shocking story. Despite this demand, moving oil across continents was a logistical nightmare. It was costly, dangerous, and painfully slow. Marcus began asking the kind of questions that changed entire industries. Why was transporting oil so inefficient? Why were traders still relying on outdated, risky methods like barrels stacked in the holds of cargo ships? That's the hidden lesson here. Opportunity often hides in problems everyone complains about but no one fixes. No one saw it coming, but this quiet observation would set the stage for Shell's rise to power. He saw firsthand that the infrastructure for global oil trade was, frankly, a mess. Ships leaked, barrels spoiled, and pirates were a real threat. Imagine losing half your cargo before it even reached the beer. That's what really happened to countless traders back then. Marcus realized that whoever could solve the oil transportation problem wouldn't just make money. They'd own the market. It almost didn't work because convincing people to change the way they'd done business for decades is like asking them to bet their fortune on a coin toss. But Marcus wasn't selling them a gamble, he was selling them survival. He spoke of faster deliveries, lower costs, and safer voyages. Learn from this mistake. If you want people to embrace change, you can't just sell them the product, you have to sell them the outcome. And then came the big mental shift. Marcus understood that oil wasn't just another commodity, it was the lifeblood of a modernizing world. Every factory, every ship, every city lamp was a customer waiting to be served. This changed everything. His mind moved from thinking like a merchant to thinking like an industrialist. Still, He knew that spotting an opportunity wasn't enough. The gap between vision and reality was massive. To truly disrupt the oil trade, Marcus would need something radical, a way to move oil faster, safer, and cheaper than anyone else on the planet. And that's when the idea struck, an engineering gamble so bold it could either make him a legend or end his career right there. Topic 4: Engineering Innovation, the Oil Tanker Revolution. When Marcus Samuel first floated the idea, people thought he'd lost his mind. You won't believe this, but in the late 1800s, the concept of building a ship specifically to carry oil in bulk was seen as reckless, even dangerous. Most traders were still loading oil in wooden barrels, leaky, heavy, and prone to catching fire. Marcus wanted something entirely different: massive steel vessels, purpose-built to transport liquid gold safely across the seas. The shocking story is that this wasn't just a business decision. It was an engineering gamble. Ships of this kind had to pass through the Suez Canal, and at the time, no one had ever tried sending fully loaded oil tankers through that narrow passage. If it failed, it could have ended here: the investment, the reputation, the dream. But Marcus saw what no one else did. If it worked, the Suez would cut travel distance from Asia to Europe by thousands of miles, slashing costs and delivery times. He assembled a team of engineers and shipbuilders who believed in the vision. That's the hidden lesson. When you're attempting something the world doubts, surround yourself with people who see possibility, not just problems. The result was a fleet of specialized tankers with safety compartments, reinforced hulls, and systems to minimize risk. What really happened next stunned the industry. The first voyages sailed through without disaster, proving Marcus right. It almost didn't work, though. The early voyages faced rough seas, mechanical issues, and constant scrutiny from skeptics eager to watch him fail. But Marcus understood that innovation is rarely perfect on the first try. Learn from this mistake. The first version of your big idea doesn't have to be flawless. It just has to work well enough to prove it's possible. Refinement comes later. Once the news spread that oil could be shipped in bulk through the Suez safely, everything changed. Marcus had unlocked a trade route that shaved weeks off delivery schedules. Competitors scrambled to catch up, but he was already ahead, securing contracts with major buyers who wanted faster, cheaper fuel. That's what no one tells you about disruption. It's not just the invention, it's being first to prove it works at scale. And yet, even as the tankers filled his pockets and expanded his reach, Marcus knew this was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Transporting oil was one thing, but building a brand that could dominate the world's energy market? That would require a whole new identity, and a symbol that could travel just as far as his ships. Topic 5: The birth of Shell and global expansion. By the time Marcus Samuel's tankers were slicing through the Suez Canal like steel knives through water, he realized he needed more than just ships. He needed a name that carried weight. You won't believe this, but the answer had been sitting in his family's history all along. Shell, a nod to those polished seashells his father once sold to London's elite, now transformed into a global emblem of energy, and with it came the iconic scalloped shell logo. Simple, elegant, unforgettable. The truth revealed is that this was more than branding, it was strategy. The world was entering an era where trust in a name mattered as much as the product itself. Marcus understood that a strong identity could cross borders faster than any ship. When buyers in Europe saw the Shell emblem, they knew exactly what they were getting: reliable fuel, delivered faster and safer than anyone else could offer. That's the hidden lesson in business. Your brand is your passport. Shell's expansion was swift and calculated. Marcus locked in long-term supply deals across Asia, securing sources of crude oil others couldn't touch. No one saw it coming, but these contracts would become the foundation of Shell's dominance. Imagine the advantage. While competitors fought over scraps, Shell had guaranteed access to rivers of oil flowing steadily into its tankers. It almost didn't work in Europe, where established oil traders tried to shut him out of key ports. But Marcus adapted, building his own distribution networks. He invested in storage facilities, refineries, and partnerships that bypassed traditional gatekeepers. Learn from this mistake. Never let someone else control the one thing your business can survive without: access to your customers. This changed everything. From the bustling ports of Singapore to the industrial heartlands of Britain, the Shell name began to mean speed, safety, and supply you could count on. Even in remote towns, people recognized that scalloped shell, a symbol of progress in an age that was speeding forward like never before. But success comes with attention, and in the oil world, attention meant competition. As Shell's influence spread, it caught the eye of the biggest player in the game, a man whose empire could crush rivals without a second thought. Marcus was about to face a battle that could either destroy everything he'd built or force him into the most important alliance of his life. To Pico 6, the rivalry with Standard Oil, when Shell's red and yellow emblem started showing up in more and more ports. It didn't take long for the king of oil himself to notice. John D. Rockefeller, you won't believe this, but Standard Oil, the undisputed giant of the industry, saw Shell as a threat worth crushing. Rockefeller's empire controlled refineries, shipping, and distribution with an iron grip. Going up against him wasn't just risky. It was like challenging a lion while holding a stake in your hand. The truth revealed is that this rivalry wasn't fought in the open like a Hollywood duel. It played out in shipping rates, supply contracts, and port access. Standard Oil would undercut prices, pressure suppliers, and lock down territories just to starve Shell out of the market. It almost didn't work for Marcus. The company was bleeding cash, and whispers of bankruptcy circled like vultures. That's the hidden lesson. In business wars, the battle is often fought in the shadows, and survival depends on how well you can maneuver behind the scenes. Marcus refused to fold. Instead, he played a longer game. He sought partnerships with other oil players equally frustrated by Rockefeller's dominance. No one saw it coming, but one of these allies would change everything: Royal Dutch Petroleum, a powerful company operating in Southeast Asia. The two companies saw the same opportunity: combine resources, fight Standard Oil together, and control more of the supply chain. It almost didn't happen, though. Negotiations were tense, and merging to very different corporate cultures was like mixing oil and water. But Marcus understood that the enemy of your enemy can be your greatest asset. Learn from this mistake. Too many businesses let pride keep them from forming alliances that could save them. In the high-stakes game of survival, strategic partnerships aren't optional. They're oxygen. What really happened next was a decade-long tug-of-war. Shell and Standard Oil locked horns. In Europe, each trying to outmaneuver the other. Rockefeller had deep pockets, but Shell had agility, the ability to pivot quickly, exploit new routes, and leverage local relationships Standard Oil didn't have. This rivalry didn't just test Marcus's resilience, it sharpened Shell into a global competitor capable of taking on anyone. Still, Marcus knew that winning skirmishes wasn't enough. If Shell wanted to survive the next century, it would have to be more than just an oil transporter, and soon, global events no one could have predicted would force him to rethink everything he thought he knew about the business of oil. Topic 7. World Wars and Strategic Adaptation. When the first shots of World War I echoed across Europe, oil stopped being just a commodity. It became a weapon of war. You won't believe this, but fuel was now as critical as bullets. Nations that controlled oil supplies could power ships, tanks, and aircraft, while those without it were left vulnerable. For Shell, this was both an opportunity and a massive risk. The truth revealed was that global conflict could make or break an oil empire overnight. Marcus Samuel understood that survival meant adaptation. Trade routes were under constant threat from submarines and blockades, and supply lines could vanish in a single attack. That's the hidden lesson. In times of crisis, speed of adjustment matters more than size. No one saw it coming, but Shell pivoted fast, securing military contracts and redirecting its tankers to serve allied forces. It wasn't just about profit. It was about staying relevant in a world where the rules of commerce had been rewritten by war. It almost didn't work. Wartime economies were unpredictable and political alliances shifted like sand. But Marcus implemented a strategy that saved the company: diversification. Shell didn't just rely on crude oil shipments, it expanded into refining, lubricants, and chemical byproducts essential for the war effort. Learn from this mistake. Betting your entire business on a single product line is like standing on one leg in a storm. When World War II erupted decades later, Shell faced the same chaos on an even larger scale. What really happened was staggering. Ports were bombed, ships were sunk, and entire facilities were seized by enemy forces. Yet Shell's global network proved invaluable. Operations in safer regions kept revenue flowing, allowing the company to rebuild in war-torn areas once peace returned. This changed everything for Shell's long-term vision. The wars taught Marcus's successors that being a truly global company wasn't just about growth, it was insurance against catastrophe. By having operations spread across continents, Shell could survive disasters that wiped out less diversified competitors. That's what no one tells you about resilience. It's built before the crisis hits, not during it. Still, even with survival secured, Shell's leadership knew they couldn't just keep reacting to crises to truly dominate the energy market. They needed a bold, forward-looking move. And soon, an alliance already in place would be formalized in a way that would rewrite the history of oil forever. TOPECO 8, the merger and rise to the top. By the early 1900s, the rivalry with Standard Oil had taken its toll. You won't believe this, but despite Shell's victories, the cost of competing at that level was draining resources fast. Marcus Samuel knew that to truly cement Shell's future, it needed more than clever strategies, it needed a partner with equal muscle. The truth revealed is that this partner had been in plain sight all along: Royal Dutch Petroleum, the powerful player they had already been working alongside in Southeast Asia. In 1907, the two companies made it official. The merger between Shell and Royal Dutch wasn't just a handshake deal, it was a strategic masterstroke. Overnight, they became one of the largest oil companies in the world, with a combined fleet, global refineries, and unmatched access to resources. That's the hidden lesson here. Sometimes, scaling to the top isn't about outcompeting your rivals. It's about joining forces with the right ones. It almost didn't work, though. Integrating to massive operations across different continents came with cultural clashes, logistical headaches, and competing visions. But Marcus and his partners understood that the shared goal, to take on Standard Oil and win, outweighed any internal friction. Learn from this mistake. Too many leaders focus on differences during mergers instead of rallying around the mission that brought them together. Post-merger, the new Royal Dutch Shell wasted no time. Investments poured into exploration, pushing into untapped oil fields in the Middle East, Africa, and South America. What really happened was a shift from being just an oil transporter to becoming a fully integrated energy empire. From drilling to refining to global distribution, this changed everything, and it wasn't just about oil anymore. Shell began experimenting with new technologies, refining methods, and even early research into alternative fuels. No one saw it coming, but these innovations would give the company a head start in an industry that was already beginning to think beyond crude. That's what no one tells you about staying at the top. You have to start planning your next move before anyone else knows it's needed. Still, even as Shell expanded and innovated, the man who had started it all was nearing the end of his journey. The question wasn't just about how big the company had become, but what legacy it would carry after him, and whether the vision of a shopkeeper's son could survive the shifting tides of the global energy market. TOPECO 9, Legacy and Impact. Marcus Samuel's story began in a small London shop selling seashells and ended with his name tied to one of the most powerful companies on earth. You won't believe this, but today Shell operates in over 70 countries with thousands of service stations and billions in revenue flowing through its operations every year. The truth revealed is that all of it traces back to a man who refused to see limits where others saw walls. The hidden lesson here is simple but rare. Vision isn't about predicting the future, it's about creating it. Marcus didn't just ride trends, he built them. No one saw it coming when his seashell merchant's son turned maritime trade routes into oil highways, and oil highways into a global energy empire. What really happened was the result of decades of calculated risks, stubborn persistence, and the ability to adapt before circumstances forced his hand. It almost didn't work many times. Wars, rivalries, economic downturns, each could have been the moment Shell collapsed. But Marcus had embedded resilience into the company's DNA, diversification, strategic alliances, and a relentless push toward innovation. Learn from this mistake. To many entrepreneurs focus only on growth, forgetting that survival is the first measure of success. Even today, Shell's influence goes far beyond pumping fuel. It has shaped entire economies, funded infrastructure, and driven technological leaps in energy production and transportation. That's what no one tells you about big business. Its fingerprints often cover history in ways the public rarely notices. This changed everything for how future leaders think about scale. Marcus proved that it's possible to start small and still play on the world stage if you're willing to think bigger than your circumstances. His journey is a reminder that your beginnings don't define your ceiling, and yet, as Shell continues to operate in the modern era, questions remain. Will the company's future leaders honor the same adaptability and vision that carried it this far? Or will they face their own moment of reckoning, the kind that forces them, just like Marcus once did, to reinvent everything they thought they knew? So now you know. The truth revealed about how a boy from a small London shop built an empire that changed everything. But here's the real question. What will you do with it? Will you let this just be another inspiring story you heard once? Or will you take the hidden lessons and put them to work in your own life? You won't believe this, but the same principles Marcus used, spotting opportunities, building alliances, adapting before it's too late, are still the difference between staying stuck and creating something that lasts. No one saw it coming when he did it. Maybe no one will see it coming when you do. It almost didn't work for him, and it might not work for you the first time either. That's not failure, that's the process. What no one tells you is that success rarely looks like a straight line. Learn from this mistake. Waiting for the perfect moment means you'll never start. So, what's your move? What problem do you see that no one's solving? What opportunity is sitting in front of you, waiting for someone bold enough to take it? If you're ready to keep learning from the stories of people who turn small beginnings into global legacies, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next story we tell might just be the spark that changes your life.